Now let's turn to more in detail to Syria, and I'd like to give the floor to Iyas Al-Maleh.
Madam Chair, my dear distinguished MEPs, thank you for inviting me to speak on the present situation in Syria. It is difficult to discuss the prisons in Syria without discussing the enforced disappearances in these prisons too. Enforced disappearances in Syria became very common in the late 70s, to the point where we have more than 17,000 cases reported since 1979. Although these disappearances did not happen during the term of Bashar al-Assad, but he has not done anything to resolve this issue with the families of these disappeared individuals, and this issue will not disappear until it is dealt with. Since the year 2000 until now, the number of prisoners of opinion in Syria is estimated at about 4,500 prisoners. Most of these prisoners have faced a period of enforced disappearance that will vary in length from few days to several months. Two very highly publicized cases to use as examples are the case of Mr. Haytham Maleh, 79 years old, who was abducted on October 14, 2009, and disappeared for 6 days, and the case of the young female blogger Tal al-Mallouhi, 19 years old, who was arrested on December 27, 2009, and has disappeared until recently. We now have unconfirmed news that her parents were able to visit her in prison in Damascus only a few days ago. Not to forget the case of Nizar Rastanawi, who finished serving a 5-year sentence in 2009, and he has not been released yet. Since then, he has disappeared. Some believe he was killed under torture. This brings us to the issue of systematic torture and the cases of death under torture in Syrian prisons. When you talk to anyone of the released prisoners regarding of the age and the length of the detention, you will hear stories of beating and torture under all kinds of tools. Physical and mental torture is still applied as a punishment style or to extract information in the Syrian security branches, among two of which the criminal one. There are many torture methods applied in those branches, among of which are torture with water, burning with cigarettes, hitting with electrical cable, wind carpet, slashing, hitting and kicking, whipping on the feet, insulting, threatening to torture the family members, wife, mothers, sons, daughters, or other family members. Torture led to many deaths, especially among Kurdish detainees after the Kamishli incident. Here are some cases of death under torture as examples and not to be comprehensive list for the sake of time. Syrian Kurdish citizen Ahmed Mamo Kanjo was arbitrarily detained on March 15, 2004 on the background of the sad incident of March 12, 2004. He was beaten by a military security officer with the end of an automatic weapon on his head that caused a 10-centimeter cut in his head, which led to his transfer to the hospital. While he was there, marks of systematic torture were seen all over his body. Later, the administration of the mental hospital in Aleppo delivered Mr. Kanjo to his family. He appeared to be in abnormal bad health and was complaining of continuous pain in his head, loss of balance, and foggy vision. Doctors stated that the cause of his death on May 13, 2004 was due to a severe internal hemorrhage in the brain that was caused by systematic beating during his 2 months of the arbitrary detention. Firas Mahmoud Abdullah was killed at the Criminal Security Center in Damascus while he was being interrogated by them on January 7, 2004. On the morning of Saturday, January 10, 2009, a military security patrol delivered the body of Muhammad Amin al-Shawwa to his family in Deir el-Zor, 4 months after he was arbitrarily detained on the suspicion of being an Islamist. By 3 p.m., his body was buried. His family was not allowed to carry on a proper burial ceremony. Mr. al-Shawwa, born in 1966 in Deir el-Zor, he was a math teacher, a husband, and a father. Ahmed Salim al-Sheikh, he was born in Damascus in 1970, married and a father of 4 children. At 7 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, November 6, 2007, in an area called Ruknuddin in Damascus, Mr. al-Sheikh's car was stopped by the members of the criminal security. He was pulled out of his car in front of his wife and 4 children and beaten to death in the street. Abdullah Iyas al-Bitar of Dar'a province, 33 years old, married and a father to 1 child. He was employed by BMO Bank in Damascus. He was detained by the Criminal Security Branch for 40 days on the suspicion of money theft from the bank where he was employed. Severe torture while being interrogated led to his death on October 27, 2008, and his body was delivered to his family 2 days later on October 29, 2008. Jalal Hawran al-Qubaisi, born in Damascus in 1977, he passed away on Monday, May 31, 2010, while he was illegally detained at the Damascus Criminal Security Branch. The cause of his death was severe beating. Mr. Haytham Maleh stated in his enforced disappearance account sent to me from Adra prison the following. In the room there was the German anguish cable and a cut-out piece from a car tire 4 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters long. They are used to beat prisoners with, as I heard their screams with my own ears. Also, there was an electric cable on the table behind the door. There was a metal container which is filled with fire. I do not know how it is used though. Prison conditions are horrible to say the least. For example, Mr. Haytham Maleh prison cell is about 60 square meters shared with 60 other common criminals. For a prisoner to go to the bathroom, he must step over bodies laying down on the floor. Mr. Maleh sleeps on a thin mattress on the floor. He is denied access to his medication. His lawyers are not able to speak to him freely. Mr. Maleh is always accompanied by a prison guard, unlike other prisoners, when visiting the prison doctor. Mr. Maleh is denied access to any reading materials and not allowed to visit the prison library. Of course, his situation is very similar to other prisoners of opinion, as you have seen in the letter from Adra prison that most of you have received a copy of in an email from Mrs. Maureen Thomas of Amnesty International UK. Syrian detention centers are countless. Almost there is one on every street corner. Every security branch has a basement that is used for detention and torture. To give you an idea, I'm going to mention a few of them, but I'm going to skip actually the list for the sake of time. It's just a list of detention centers. Before I conclude, I would like to mention briefly the struggle of the lawyers who try to defend the prisoners in Syria, where impunity exists for those committing human rights crime. Beside the harassment they get from the security apparatus, they also face harassment by the Syrian Bar Association, which is not an independent entity, and it is an arm of the regime. A clear example is the case of Mr. Muhannad al-Hassani, who was disbarred for life from practicing law, for monitoring the State Security Court hearings and reporting on them, and for forming a human rights organization. Then, when they are imprisoned themselves, like my father and Muhannad al-Hassani, other lawyers are not allowed to visit them to discuss their defense, as they have to get permission from the Bar Association in order to do so. I was under the impression that the horrible life in Syria, as I knew it, is gone with the passing of Hafiz al-Assad, and that it is changing for the better. But as I'm sure most of you hear from those living in Syria, the situation remains as horrible and it is getting worse. Some tell me from inside Syria that Syria's society is on the verge of collapse. I do beg you to do what is in your conscience and what you have sworn to uphold and help the Syrian people get the minimum rights they deserve. It is the Syrian people, the friend you need, and not the Syrian government. Tomorrow, the EU Commissioner will be meeting with officials in Damascus regarding the EU-Syria Partnership Agreement. Signing unconditional agreement at this stage with a criminal regime will only make the EU an accomplice. Engagement in Syria is very important, but not on the cost of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iyas El-Maleh. You've given us striking details of the methods of torture in Syrian detention centers and prisons. And now I think it's our duty to turn to the European Commission to hear what more the European Union could do in order to come to an end of these horrible practices and ill treatment, torture of prisoners in Lebanon and Syria. Obviously, for everyone else, I need to mention that we are dealing with a lot of countries whom we know are using these inhuman methods. And today our attention is on Syria and Lebanon. We will continue later on the situation of prisons in Palestine and Israel. Unfortunately, as I explained at the beginning of the meeting, we can't do it now because we couldn't have access to good speakers for today. So I'd like to have Mr. Geurts from the European Commission to give his view, and notably, could you also comment on the agreement that Iyas El Maleh has mentioned, the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement on Human Rights?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair, for organizing this hearing, and thank you very much to Mr. Houri and Mr. Al Maleh who have brought so many informations and evaluations on the table today. Let me tell you that we do share many of the concerns that you have raised right now, starting with Syria, concerns on allegations and cases of torture and ill treatment and forced disappearance, incommunicado detention, poor prison conditions, lack of respect for detainees' rights, and so on. And this shows that the human rights situation on the ground in Syria has not really improved in the past years, and this shows also continued serious discrepancies in Syria's compliance with the commitment that it has taken under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and under the Convention Against Torture, notably. As you know, also, the EU has publicly, and continue to do so, voiced concerns over arrests and verdicts against human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, bloggers, and Kurds. As you might have seen and read, the High Representative Vice President Mrs. Ashton herself on 27th of July gave a statement recalling Syria's commitments under international law and urging for the release of political prisoners. And Mrs. Ashton addressed in particular the three cases that were mentioned today of Mr. Haytham Al-Maleh, Muhannad Hassani, and Ali Abdullah. Just last week, on 18 October, the EU head of missions in Syria have repeated these messages in a public statement on the occasion of the award of the prestigious Martin Ennals Prize to Mr. Hassani. We are, of course, extremely disappointed at the recent rejection by the Syrian Court of the appeals filed by Mr. Al-Maleh and Mr. Al-Hassani. Let me assure you that we will continue to raise those three cases and many other cases with Syria. Respect for universal human rights will continue to be a recurring issue in our contacts with Syria. The EU delegation and member states' embassies in Damascus continue to monitor the situation, continue also to observe trials. Actually, what they are doing there is a kind of a best practice in the implementation of our EU guidelines on human rights defenders. Support for human rights defenders and their families and lawyers will be pursued, and under the instrument of the financial instrument of the European Neighbourhood Policy, we are providing assistance to judiciary reforms. We'll start this year, as well as for strengthened dialogue of the government with civil society next year. Now, as to the association agreement, as you know, the association agreement has been pending since October 2009 because of lack of Syria's signature and Syria's still ongoing assessment of the political and the economic impact of the association agreement. Let me reiterate that based on cases in the region and in the neighborhood policy area, we really see this association agreement as a means to really establish a regular political dialogue with Syria, including and especially on human rights. So, as other cases in the region have shown, such agreement allows us to really put officially human rights on the agenda for a sustained and regular engagement with the countries on those.